Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 40. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone who has liked, shared, commented, and subscribed to the show. Your support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guest today. I also want to thank Cerberus Strength for bringing you this episode today for free. Owned and operated by active lifters, Cerberus is trusted by the top strength sport athletes and lifters in the world. Cerberus's wide range of products are made by athletes for athletes, truly living up to its moniker, made by the strong for the strong. From sandbags, training gear, and supplements to lifting straps, knee sleeves, and more, Cerberus Strength provides the highest quality strength products on the market, designed and manufactured to help you defeat, destroy, and devour your competition. So if you're in the market for the highest quality strength conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to use promo code STRENGTH_game at checkout to receive 10% off your next order at CerberusStrength.com. And in this week's episode, I am joined by Regan Quaal. Quaal is an assistant strength conditioning coach at the University of Minnesota, where he assists with both the men's and women's hockey programs, in addition to departmental research. Prior to his current role, he spent time as a sports performance coach at the University of Providence and Georgetown University, a head strength conditioning coach at Episcopal High School in Alexandria, Virginia, as well as graduate assistant coach at Belmont University. He started his career as an intern at Western Michigan University, as well as served as a sports science intern previously at Minnesota under Cal Dietz. During his collegiate coaching stints, Coach Quaal has coached, programmed for, and consulted with many other gyms and athletes, including CrossFit Lake Effect and Big North Barbell. He's the owner of MASQ Training, an online training program for gyms and individual strength athletes. He's also an outdoor enthusiast who enjoys mountain biking and backpacking when he's not training in the weight room. And Regan has been competing in CrossFit since 2014 and most recently training for Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Coach Regan Quaal. What's going on, everybody? I'm excited today. We're not joined by Brandon Wickett. We are joined by Regan Quaal. What's going on, dude? How's it going?
Hey, it's going good, Nick. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I'm excited we actually got to finally get this going. I know you've been super busy. You had to move. You just got back to the University of Minnesota. You had a few competitions going. So we got to get into all that stuff, but I want to hop into it first, get a little bit more of your backstory. Like, how did you actually first get involved in the strength game and training? And then how did you get to being competitively involved in CrossFit? And now recently, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
So the whole training background started with hockey and football at a young age in high school. Then I attempted to play college hockey at a D2 school after taking a couple of years up from playing sport. Trained as hard as I could, thought I was doing the right things to prepare for that at Grand Valley State. Didn't end up making the team. So then I was kind of left like, oh, what do I do now? Thought about doing bodybuilding, but there wasn't really that like daily competitive aspect to it. I kind of missed that and just training on my own, not being part of the group. Found CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting my sophomore year of college. And then through that, I really dove in headfirst to that, started cleaning the gym for memberships. I could be there every day of the week, eventually started coaching, and then became the head coach for the gym, programming for the gym by the time I was a junior, senior in college. And then from there, after working with Gen Pop for 3 or 4 years, I wanted to give it a go with the athletic population. And that started at Western Michigan. And then from there, went to Georgetown, where that's where I met Nick through. And yeah, I was really thrown into it out there, had 4 teams. And then I was also running a high school at night while still continuing that competitive CrossFit career. And I kept doing that, the CrossFit thing, for the last 4 years, been to a few different schools since then. And when I moved to Minneapolis, all the CrossFit gyms required you to wear masks while you train. And I was not about doing that. So I was like, and I also trained wrestlers at my previous school, which really made me want to try wrestling. So I stopped by a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu gym. They were training, they weren't wearing masks. I asked if I could sign up, started up, and then did a competition 3 months later.
There you go. That's wild. Yeah, you definitely kind of went around the block with a bunch of places. I know that. I mean, even in your current position now, like you're involved with a lot of Division I players, like working with the hockey program, professional players too. Because I mean, coming back to Minnesota, either as a former player or just a professional, like it's a hot spot, like working with Cal Dietz and everything over there. And I mean, you cut your teeth like working with Gen Pop, even Georgetown, obviously, like that's where we kind of know each other from, like that high school aspect you get from working in the mornings or in the afternoons, like in the weight room, like for the Hoyas, and then you go right over and work with the high school. And that definitely probably helps your online presence too with your coaching. But you kind of touched on already how you actually got involved to your current position. What do you see as like some of the differences, like, and maybe some of the benefits that you've gotten being able to work with so many different populations, like from Gen Pop to high school to college to pro, and then even yourself now dabbling with so many different like avenues for training? How has that kind of helped your coaching? And then how does that help you like relate to more people because of that experience?
Yeah, well, I don't know. When Cal interviewed me for a job a while back, he's like, "How many programs do you write a month?" And I was like, "Oh, I read 5 teams, 11 clients, 2 gyms, myself." I was like, probably like upward and close to 20. And he's like, "Oh, that's pretty good, actually. Not many people do that many." I was like, and I think it's just the practice of trying to fit the needs or the goals of what every individual you're working with has, and just adapting those goals and helping them set, like really it's helping them set those goals and figuring out how to get them in. And the more you do that, like these goals, they kind of repeat themselves with clients over the years as you get new ones or lose certain ones. So it just makes you a more well-rounded coach in general. And then with myself, like training for the CrossFit and training for Jiu-Jitsu, it was crazy how much I had to change my training to be able to roll every night versus doing CrossFit. Because I guess just the way the jiu-jitsu was, and I never wrestled growing up. I like would jump in there every once in a while before hockey season when I was in high school. Your CrossFit's a very slow moving activity. Like the fastest thing you're gonna do is an air squat versus jiu-jitsu. Like you have to react to a guy trying to shoot you when you're standing, like starting from standing, or someone trying to get like side control or something along those lines. So it was my training shifted much more towards like speed and power training while trying to maintain the strength, because there's so many like isometric holds in the jiu-jitsu.
Right. No, that's cool. I mean, now kind of going on that, like the competitiveness that you've actually, now you got like a BJJ competition under your belt, and then like being involved in CrossFit for so long, like, do you see a benefit in like your training from jujitsu that actually kind of carries over to CrossFit? I know you talked about like having to actually change and do some different things to actually excel in it because of the speed element. But like now, like, does it help with like some of like the body weight movements, or like some of like the tumbling and like the handstand walks and stuff, just being more comfortable manipulating your own body weight? And then like, do you transfer any of that stuff that you've taken from your competitive experience on the mat to like some of the players you're working with now or some of your clients?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing with jiu-jitsu was, at first I was very poor at controlling my breathing in the stressful situations. So that just carries over everything. It's like when you're like in a choke and you got to figure out how to get out of it. I mean, the transfers, like after you get choked down in the morning at 6 a.m. and you got to go to work, you're like, oh, well, can't get much worse than that. But yeah, so learning how to control my breathing and stay calm in stressful situations definitely transferred over to the CrossFit. But also like my aerobic fitness from rolling, like I was walking around with like a resting heart rate of like 47 or 48 all the time without doing any extra work on top of it. So when I started training CrossFit again, like the last few weeks, it took only a couple. I just really had to get the volume of the movements back, but my fitness and recovery was there. Like the Jiu Jitsu is like the ultimate GPP in my opinion. After doing it, I was like, that's what I want my kids doing. They're like when they starting sport, because all the rolling and tumbling too. It's amazing how much better your back feels once you get like strong, moving in all those different ranges of motion versus CrossFit, which is a completely sagittal sport. So yeah, my body, my back and hips felt healthier than they have in a long time. But as for implementing that stuff with my athletes, I haven't done so much of that because it really just doesn't fit where we're at in our program. When we get back to GPP stuff in September, we'll touch on again after training all summer. We will implement some of the crawling and rolling. And I think using some of that stuff, especially the rolling, like into like accelerations and something like that for like equilibrium training and balance training, just to like keep the athlete prepared. And like for it almost goes back to that goat drill that Cal's been using. I don't know if you've seen that, but put the athlete in a situation they're uncomfortable in, like when they're running around the rings, passing the tennis ball around their back and answering math questions, and see how they respond and until they adapt better. Just get the brain functioning on a high.
Yeah, that's cool to see that, like the balance between the two. I think that's important. And yeah, that was one of the big things that I found out pretty quickly, like when I started rolling and getting involved in jiu-jitsu, was having someone on top of you, like in guard or just like side control or something, and you're trying everything to get out, and it's someone that weighs more than you, or they're putting you in a compromised position, and all you want to do is like panic and get them off and like feel like you're in control. But jiu-jitsu is so much different than wrestling too. Like being on your back is still an advantageous position sometimes, and really you just gotta relax, control your breathing, like, and think. It is like human body chess, and that's what really intrigued me about it. And also, I hate running, like unless it's sprinting or like I'm being tricked into playing like my sport. So it is the best GPP ever. And just to be able to roll around and keep your heart rate going, like I'm trying to find more and more ways to get that involved somehow into my athletes like program without it necessarily being grappling and people like grabbing onto each other, but finding ways to manipulate your body and move and tumble and like do cartwheels or whatever it ends up being, and just actively keep the heart rate up. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but not many of the guys were much smaller than I was. So rarely was there a guy bigger than me holding me down. He was always smarter, and I still was freaking out trying to figure out a way out. And I was like, oh, this is jiu-jitsu for you. 150-pound guys choking me out once again.
Oh yeah, it's nothing more debilitating and harmful to your ego than a 150-pound person like on your back at 6 a.m. like a backpack choking you.
You're just like, what do I do? What do I do?
It's humbling, but it's like not getting involved in it too much, like right before COVID, and then being able to finally get back to it for the last few months. Like I could see a mental change in myself. I could see like the differences and being able to pick up cues and everything. Have you found with it? I thought this interesting, and it's good to talk to another coach that does it. Have you found when you're starting to drill that you feel more comfortable teaching someone, even though you just learned the movement, rather than actually being able to execute it? Or am I just a really bad athlete?
100%. I feel like I'm coaching these kids on how to do things that I can't even do. But I understand the cues the coach is using, but I'm still like trying to put them together myself. But I can like walk someone else. Yeah, it's weird.
All right, good.
Yeah,
I feel more comfortable that way now.
No, I haven't even thought about that. But now that you say that, I'm like, yeah, I do that every day.
That's awesome. Hey, so like a big thing about this is too, like you started training and you got right into the competitive side. Like what makes you, I know like you found a reason why you got into jiu-jitsu and everything, but why actually choose to compete and like with your athletes and with your like online clientele and some of the other places you've been at, has that built any like rapport or like help build relationships or even buy-in with your athletes because you've chose to stay competitive?
Yeah, I think it builds huge buy-in. Like, even with our intern class we have now all summer, we got 10 of them. They train every day at 1 o'clock after the athletes train, and they're doing the exact same program as the athletes, or they're a week ahead, just so they know what it feels like, so they can coach the athletes through. And it's like not optional. It is optional, but if you're the one guy not doing it, you look kind of funny. But yeah, so like I think if you like jumping right into the competition, I don't know, I like preparing for things and having a goal set for something, because then it just gives me another reason to go in and train 5-6 days a week, whatever I'm doing at the time. And I like the idea of the Jiu Jitsu and the CrossFit too, and training on top of that, because like our athletes every day, they lift weights with us, say in the morning, then they go practice softball at night. I mean, if we're training in the morning and going jiu-jitsu at night, and if we're getting a little burnt out or run down from lifting weights, and we love lifting weights and like that's our thing, it's just like imagine how they feel when they're going to school to play a sport and not lift weights. So that kind of just keeps me in check too with the training I'm running for my athletes, and puts it in perspective, because I'm like, I love this and I don't feel like training today. So yeah, and also, I mean, preparing for jiu-jitsu competition too, to do a lot different than CrossFit and like an actual sport. I don't really consider CrossFit a sport necessarily, more of like a hobby. But yeah, it's peaking the athlete, tapering the athlete, knowing when they need to deal. It's like, man, if I'm tired, they're tired. It just really puts things in perspective. And when your athletes see you training hard, I think it's a lot easier for them to go in and train hard as well.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. That's cool though, to actually see like how you've kind of altered your program to realize that, yeah, the athletes were working out. And like, that's my biggest recruiting pitch. It's like, as much as I like lifting, most people coming in aren't coming in to lift, they're coming in to play their sport. And right now, I mean, California's still pretty shut down at the moment. So competitions for like me for Highland games and strongman are pretty few and far between to actually get out unless you like really travel. So like jujitsu and just lifting have been my main means of like training at the moment. And I found that like I'm getting even more simplistic with my programming so that it doesn't affect my rolling. And then now like being on the mats doesn't affect my lifting. And I really don't have as much in the programs as I normally do. I don't feel as taxed after it. And I found a lot bigger balance. And I can see the correlation that has with my players more, where I just have to stay with like some of the simplistic movements, just get the volume in and make it as optimal as possible. I think that's the biggest thing that I've started to find with rolling again and training and trying to combine the two, is making sure that one feeds into the other and it's just optimal. That's all I want to hit. I don't need to be excessive. Just have to hit exactly what I need to hit, and that's it.
No, yeah, I agree. When I first started jiu-jitsu too, I was trying to do way too much, and like 3 out of the 6 days I was going to jiu-jitsu gym, like I wasn't worth anything. I couldn't do anything, and I slowly started shifting the program around, and yeah, I found balance. Yeah, it's all about finding balance and keeping the athlete prepared to perform on the field.
No doubt. Yeah, I think it helps. I mean, both of us are trying to compete in two different sports. We're also trying to like coach and do everything on the side. So it definitely helps to be able to kind of try it on ourselves and compete and figure out how to balance those two different, like often like completely different values that you're training for, and be able to mesh the two together somehow and still have enough energy for us to coach, and then think about it for the athletes, for them to be successful in the classroom and everything else they're doing. So
yeah,
definitely cool.
And I mean, like another thing too is, I don't know about you, but like when my training and like jujitsu were on point, you need to be like, you can't be skipping meals. You got to be going to sleep on time. And when all that's, it keeps everything else on point as well. If I want to be able to train and jujitsu every day, everything else in my life has to be on point too. So like I find work's a lot better. So yeah, just also from that perspective too, like staying busy, and it keeps you on your game.
Right. Yeah, I feel the same way. And it kind of like snowballs itself. If I can't go to a session in the morning, like I try to find a way to make it up and then try to keep those positive things rolling. And it definitely lends to be helpful for whatever the next thing is that hour I have. And like, but just try to compound those things like positive interest the whole way. I think it's huge and helpful. But I know with your current position, like you're still pretty heavily involved on the research side of stuff too. So like with the sports performance field and with what you're kind of doing with the hockey program, and then even with those interns you said you were working with too, how do you kind of go about blending some of the scientific like research side of it to actually the practical application?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is just constantly testing your athletes and like reassessing that testing. And the main one we do right now is 5, 10, 15, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. So a 5 meter split on a 30-meter sprint. And we use those numbers, plug them into a calculation Cal has based on like everyone he's worked with over the last 25 years or so to figure out what phase the athlete needs, like based on it. Is there 0 to 5 the struggle? Do they need like isometric strength? 5 to 10 their weakness, they need power. 10 to 20 they need top end speed. So we do that with the athletes every Monday, and we put them in a phase according to that. And yeah, and the big thing with that is it's like even like during the month of June, we threw everyone in eccentrics and isometrics because no one has done a true strength phase, 4-week strength phase in over a year because COVID last summer and everything. So there's still things you fall back in because you know you just need them and like the residual training qualities to improve other stuff. But yeah, that's our big one. We also use this thing called the 1080 Quantum, which is basically like a Smith machine on steroids. And we measure the athlete's force output on all the major, like our major movements, like split squat, bench press, there's a few others. And we see how much force they're putting out at 0.3 meters per second, 0.8 and 1.3 to kind of create a force velocity curve for the athlete on all those main movements. And we see where they're lacking too. So we also tie that into our 5, 10, 20. And another one that I've been using myself, and I think we're gonna try to start using is the MASQ, looking at like muscle oxygen saturation and figuring out where our athletes' weaknesses I guess you look at it from like a conditioning standpoint, like are they utilization limited or delivery limited? And typically they're delivery limited just because like hockey's more a high power sport, and their issues are going to come from pumping blood to the muscles versus actually extracting that oxygen from the muscle.
Right.
So like those are the big ones right now, but there's always like little things going on that we're working on. Like right now we're working on the output of the athlete, like that bent knee calf raise position, looking at their strength there and correlating that to other things. There's a few others. Yeah.
Okay. That's cool. When you actually go through, is most of this stuff like formal testing, or you try to embed this into the programming like as easy as possible?
With the sprinting, we embed it to the program. So we hit 2 30s every Monday, and we typically do 6 sprints of some sort, like cells, flies, stairs of some sort every day. So that day we just cut 2 of them because we have a running program for like whatever phase you're in. And then with that strength testing I was talking about, we plug those in when we need to retest an athlete. Just like if they're doing split squats that day, we're going to go throw them on the quantum. They'll test them. They're going to do their first few sets on the quantum. So we plug in as much as we can just to keep the flow in the weight room and keep the athletes training. Because we don't like taking a whole day out just to train. I mean, just to test. Sorry.
No, that's the best way to do it, I think, because then it makes all the training even that more important when you're always kind of testing, retesting, and doing assessments on the fly. I mean, I think the warm up is the best way to actually do a movement analysis, like rather than make it super formal. And the same with embedding your testing to the program. I mean, sometimes it's great to have a testing day and to kind of get everything under your belt, but that's not really conducive to how sports work and how often you're actually going. Like track, if you're only like competing like big competitions 2 or 3 times a year, 4 times a year, whatever it ends up being, then you have to peak for something. But when you know, like hockey, you're playing back-to-back games and you're playing 3 or 4 in a week, like you definitely need to make sure that it's within your program so that you can recover quickly, you could still be at peak levels, and can you continuously do that over the course of a season. So you've done a lot of stuff like within this point, like in the off season. How much does this kind of shift when you get to in season? Are you still doing some of this embedded testing and like all this research you talked about, like with the Moxie and everything? Or is this something you guys are starting to implement now in the hopes of really be in depth more in the season?
What we're gonna try to do in season is we're gonna try to make that 30-meter test with the 5 splits a little bit more in depth and almost break it down into ratios for each 5-meter to like what's the optimal ratio for a fast 30-meter sprint. And then from there, it will go away from like your typical block periodization, and we'll be doing something more along the lines of like, oh, this athlete needs isometric and speed. Like, what are the 2 qualities he needs? And we'll be training for both of those at the same time. Just because, and especially I would think like when we have down weeks or less time to train, possibly targeting a couple qualities from like a block perspective versus just focusing on one to keep the athlete performing more optimally. Because like in season, it's just going to be like this the whole time. If we can hit 2 qualities at once, we'll keep them performing more optimally and then have even more specific training.
Gotcha. Yeah, for those coaches that like haven't really worked with hockey and everything too, like you're talking about like doing all these split numbers and everything, obviously like dry land training, this isn't like on the rink. This isn't on the ice at all too. So what are some of the other differences that you guys are kind of looking at, or performance qualities that happen training for ice hockey as compared to maybe some sprint and field-based sports?
Well, there is an on ice test that we do as well, I guess, with like gates and everything, that has the athlete excel off each foot and change of direction off each foot, which leads to the excel, and then also puts them in a top end speed. It's kind of there's like 15 gates on this thing. So we do something like that too, to look at them on the ice to make sure what we're doing off the ice is carrying over. But yeah, so the big things we're doing with like the hockey player versus the field sport, I think too, is we're trying to get them out of the positions in the early off season that hockey puts you into, like short and hip flexors, anterior pelvic tilt, all those kind of things. By like something we do is we perform 5-minute isometric holds. So like a lot of the guys' shoulders are rolled really far forward after playing hockey, just that's the position there when they're playing their sport. So we'll do something like a 5-minute dumbbell bench press hold where their tissue just gradually lengthens. And it's like tissue remodeling, just because as they hold that long around, it's really like a 5-minute, really, really slow eccentric because the tissue just gradually lengthens. And then something like a split squat too, if we're trying to force that back leg straight, after 5 minutes, gradually that hip flexor will lengthening that tissue. And then we'll also do things to get the hams and glutes fired up because hockey is such a quad dominant sport.
So like if you're looking at it from like a yearly perspective, in the early off season, like you guys are coming off your last game of the year, hopefully it's a championship, but looking at that, like you're going to probably have a transition phase or maybe some downtime where it's just active recovery or completely nothing. Then you're going into like maybe this tissue remodeling that you were talking about with those long isometrics, and then maybe some of that GPP work, like specifically off the ice, get away from that. And then you start implementing maybe some of this testing to see specifically what this athlete needs at this specific amount of time. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, like it's transition period, downtime, those 5-minute ISOs, an 80 station GPP circuit that's got like 1,200 reps in it that they just roll through. Yeah, and then what we did this year that's a little bit different is we threw everyone into power first, because it's almost like an extension of that GPP, and power falls right in between your speed and your strength. So it kind of, the transfers into both. Threw everyone into power, and then we went into strength. Now we're testing and putting them in speed and power based on what their numbers show us.
Right on. And how does this for you guys? Like, this is very in depth. You have, obviously you're working with Cal and you've got interns and everything, working with both the hockey programs there. Like, this all sounds great, and you have a lot of stuff going on. You have a lot of pieces that help, like, with the performance side of the team. How does that kind of shift when you actually go on the road too? Like, are you able to actually do this stuff as much as possible on the road, or are you really just controlling what you can at home in Minnesota before you kind of move on?
So when you say on the road, you mean when I like move on to another school?
No, like when you actually like travel, like if you guys are, like, say you're going up to Wisconsin to play and you're going to be gone for like 3 or 4 days, like how are you kind of able to do all these things, maybe with all this technology and all the pieces you have? Are you taking everything with you? Do you have a modified kind of version you do on the road? Or like, how does stuff change just when you get away from campus?
Oh, so like the big things I think when we're on the road is like obviously the guys who aren't playing, they're doing like aerobic work or some sort of like muscular endurance work the day of games. But then with everyone else, we have like some recovery protocols that we use both when we're at home and away. And we just do our best to fit those in on the road. And there's not much training, there's not much testing just because, like in season, if they got a game, they got day off in another game. At most, we're doing like some recovery protocols, maybe in a little bike in, but nothing crazy in terms of that.
Gotcha. Hey, so with a lot of the research that you kind of go through, like a lot of strength coaches, they kind of get, or at least in my observation and me personally, a lot of the research that kind of gets to me is either pretty outdated or it's simplified stuff that we kind of learned from the book and everything. So we kind of know, and all it's doing is re-solidifying a fact that we know, or maybe it's something that we show a coach to say, hey, maybe you're doing this wrong. Like, no one does this sort of conditioning test, stuff like that. With your guys' research, like either personally or with what like Cal and the rest of the staff there, kind of how they direct what you're looking for, how do you guys actually like go about figuring out what you want to look into next? Like, where do these kind of questions come from? And then, like, practically speaking, how do you kind of go about attacking, finding this research or putting together like an eventual solution, like for these problems you have to help the players in their performance?
I think the biggest thing is we just try to find what problems within the program, or even where we're creating problems, like things that could be better or things that it just doesn't seem to fit with like what phase we're doing or what type of training we're looking for. We're just always trying to like find problems and fix them. And those lead us down rabbit holes. And I think like the one that Cal's been into most recently, we've been into is looking at the pattern that like a quad dominant movement, like a squat or a trap bar puts you into when you go sprinting. It causes like an oscillation in your running because you're like the quad push. And that led to the prime times and being like a more glute ham dominant movement to propel you across the ground. So we're looking for problems with the program and just trying to figure out ways to fix them. And that, I think that with that too, like trying to figure out ways to solve your problems, you look at what everyone else is doing, even in other fields, and you try to apply it to what you're doing. And yeah, like the prime time too is, I think Cal said he got that from Chris Corpus because Corpus was using those, but he was using them with his track athletes. We applied it to our hockey players, and everyone's running times improved once we started using them within our program, just to get the athletes out of that quad pattern, which they're already all in, even more so because they're hockey players. So
that's cool. Have you, I know obviously like being in that program and coming back to Minnesota and everything, like it's a little bit different when you have someone as a director like him kind of leading the charge and doing some of this research that probably most people at different schools would maybe have, like, get some pushback. Like, you're going to try this thing. We're not really sure what this is. This is new. Like, did you kind of see that at some of your other schools in the past? Like, hey, we're doing some of this and it doesn't look like traditional, like strength conditioning. It doesn't look like traditional training. I know we've spoken before, like when you were at University of Providence doing some of these like huge ancillary circuits and like crossbody patterns and stuff with the wrestlers and everything. have you seen a pushback when you were somewhere else or had to like sit down with coaches and kind of explain your rationale?
Yeah. At Providence specifically, I had pushback with the wrestling staff. I don't know if this is normal with wrestling staffs, but most wrestlers have like a background in weightlifting, whether it's like optimal or not. I mean, it's different for everyone, but like there was pushback there at first, but I was like, Coach, the last few years, your athletes have been wearing headphones during their lifts and not following the team program. I was like, if we're all doing the same thing, we're moving in the right direction. Just give me like 8 or 10 weeks, and I promise you'll be happy. And yeah, I brought a lot of things there that they had never seen before. And then they're like, oh, we're not doing cleans. And I was like, I like cleans, but your wrestlers don't like cleans. And their wrists and shoulders and elbows are always killing them anyways. And they're lifting at 6 a.m. So there's like a lot of things that you have to work around. But if you have your reasoning to back it up, and you can like, and then once again, it goes back to the testing and reassessing. We test at the beginning of the year. We test 8, 12 weeks later prior to the wrestling season started, whenever that was. Saw a lot of improvements that he thought would carry over to the wrestling. And I like hinted at like these will carry over to wrestling versus like just trying to get the one arm trap bar deadlift done. So yeah, I think it really goes back to just testing, showing them what your goal is and where you're going to take them. And then, yeah, just backing yourself up.
Definitely. Yeah. Like not actually following the status quo, like definitely helps. And you get coaches like that all the time. And I mean, anything from wrestling is notorious for it. Track throwers are very notorious for it too, because they know the importance of the weight room. And a lot of the coaches either come from programs where they had to do it themselves, or they had a very strong opinion about what they were doing. And we carry that same strong opinion, and they feel like a lot of times they know their sport better, obviously, but they also know strength training for their sport better. So it definitely takes a little bit more ingenuity and creativity and a lot of explaining sometimes to get your point across and ultimately probably get them the best results you can, because we're experts in ours. They're experts in their sport. We just have to bridge the gap.
Yeah, you just got to meet them in the middle and then slowly work them towards where you want them to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, so with, like we talked about before, you have such an extensive background with such a wide variety of different clientele, athletes, even division levels and sports as well. Like due to COVID and everything, and now like with your online like training too, have you seen like differences, whether positive or negative, in coaching some of these athletes remotely or in like a seminar fashion versus like in-person setting? Like, are there benefits to actually athletes being away from campus that you can kind of capitalize on, or is it always better to be in person, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think in person is just so much better because, for one, like I'm just not the best with the texting and like communicating with the athletes like that. And I don't think they want to be responding to my texts all day either. Yeah, and the big thing is with the athletes too is you make the connection with the athlete, you get to know them, you figure out what motivates them, and that's how you get the results out of them, or the group of athletes or the team. So yeah, I'd take the in-person any day of the week. A benefit of the remote coaching, I would say with like I have some like Olympic weightlifters and CrossFit athletes who are based out of Nashville, Michigan, like places I've used to live. Working with them through that, I think with like a weightlifter might almost work better sometimes because you give them some direction, but they also have to learn for themselves to a degree, and they slowly like figure out how to coach themselves. And they don't necessarily, I mean, you can still write the program for you, but they don't need a coach standing over them because they're slowly learning how to cue themselves, fix their own errors. So is it more optimal to have a coach there with you? Yeah, but I think there is benefit for the athlete with the remote coach who is for like providing them with the right cues and the right guidance, because they can gradually learn how to train by themselves and then like help others if they choose to go into coaching as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's one big thing that I really try to harp on, obviously, with like my student athletes is trying to teach them and educate them as much as possible. Because I mean, one, from my point of view, like just per NCAA rules and how many, or like just monetary, like how many coaches we have around the athletes. If I'm working with like my baseball team and I have the whole team at once, like I've got 40 guys in. So if it's me and 40, that's very difficult for me to be able to coach and cue and like make special recommendations for certain athletes or be able to watch testing sets or whatever it ends up being, any of those work sets. So if I educate them, they take ownership over the program and have some autonomy to be able to lead to, then now I have 41 coaches for 40 athletes. Yeah. And it looks a lot better. Guys are spotting each other. They're treating the weight room like a pit crew. They're going quick. They're spotting guys. Like they're changing weights. They're doing everything they need to. And ultimately, like I hope in 4 years, if you don't go to be professional at this point, you know how to train yourself. You know some healthy habits. Like you can probably be the best lifter on your neighborhood block if you have a garage gym now. So definitely good things to have, especially like remote coaching wise too, because I don't think you're going to have clients where you keep as much as you want, like maybe the income for 10 years.
Yeah.
You hope that you provided them such a good service that they can start to do stuff on their own. And maybe the only thing they need,
more clients.
Exactly. And then all you worry about is their programming, and like they can check their own attitude and effort, and like you're just kind of guiding them in the right direction, but they're self-motivated at that point.
Yeah. And I think also too, like just going along with that, I think it's easy to like show an athlete like what the exercise looks like, but also giving them like intrinsic cues too, like what they should be feeling, especially with like the remote athletes, because they might be looking exactly like that YouTube video looks, but if they're not feeling like what the exercise should feel like or what you want them to get out of it, then it's almost useless and they're just trying to load up as heavy as they can. So I think that intrinsic cueing too is also really helpful.
Oh, no doubt. The intent of it. The intent of it is huge because you look at a video and it's someone demoing all the time. Like it's probably an empty bar or it's just 135. Like that's just baseline, just so it looks like you're doing something. But you don't know like relatively how much effort that person's put into it. Like, is it supposed to be executed quick? Is it supposed to be executed at a tempo? Like what's their goal and purpose? Like, is it a sport type squat? Like, is it a wide powerlifting type squat? So there's a lot of things that in cues and different details that you can't really get from a video. So being able to communicate with your athletes and see how they feel and that's the one thing that you miss for sure being online is just immediate feedback. Because you'll go and like you'll say, hey, good job on a lift. Like that was a great video, whatever it is. But the feedback is maybe even 10 minutes later rather than instantaneous. And instantaneous, it helps so much more.
And just seeing them walk into the weight room and what they look like and seeing what they look like when they walk out. Like, there's so many things you miss when you're not in person.
Hey, so you talk about that kind of with Minnesota and like all the hockey athletes and being able to kind of do this test and retest, especially with your Monday protocol. Have you been able to kind of, with your online clients, work in any sort of stuff that would auto-regulate maybe and push them in the direction of what would be optimal for their training that day, whether it be like maybe wellness questionnaires or RPEs and stuff on the front end or even back end of the lifts that maybe help individualize what they're doing?
Yeah, so I really haven't gone down that route because just about everyone nowadays has a whoop band and they're looking at that and they already decide how they feel every morning when they wake up. You know what I mean? So I'm not I think those are useful to see trends, and they may be more when you're like in competitive season, but with the online people, it's more or less just prescribing ranges with intensity or reps or both. And I already can tell you most of the time which online people are going to hit. If it's 4 to 8 are going to hit 4 and the other ones are going to hit 8. You know what I mean? So I give them the option and I think more or less telling them what the goal of this phase is, like, hey, this is a maintenance phase on your squat, or hey, we're pushing the squat this next 4 weeks. But no, I haven't really used the whole questionnaire thing because I try to jump on a phone call with them every few weeks as it is and kind of get a read on where they're at. But no, I don't know. Everyone has group fans already.
Yeah, I was just curious to
Yeah.
see like if any of the stuff that you were doing in college sometimes translates over. It's a different population, there's different goals, but yeah, if you lay out the intent and you kind of know where their trajectory is and what their goals are, then
Yeah.
they're fine. They're not most of them are probably not competing all the time too, so it makes it a little
No, they
bit
got day
easier.
jobs. Yeah.
There you go. Hey, so maybe on your side of the research, is there anything specifically that you kind of go to as like maybe your go-to resource for either coaches, favorite resources, or stuff that you'd recommend that either on the coaching side, jujitsu, or CrossFit side that kind of you use to sharpen the sword for yourself?
Yeah, so it varies. Like I'll dive into certain people for periods of time, and then just move on to the next one. So as for the CrossFit, I think the best one is these guys training Think Tank, and they got a guy who works with Evan Pike. He's the guy who's brilliant into the Moxie. Everything they put out is great, and they're just leagues ahead of everybody else in the CrossFit world, or at least leagues ahead of whoever's putting stuff out. As for the strength conditioning, that Just Fly, Joel Smith, he provides, like, you listen to like a half an hour to 60 minutes one of those podcasts, and it usually like sparks an idea. You can dive down something there. And then I mean, at least this is what I talk about, like the continuing education. I think just training yourself, and we talked about this already, but trying new things on yourself, reading about it, trying on yourself for 6 to 8 weeks. I think that's the best thing you can be doing for continuing education. Like really just see how it feels going through it. Did you get a result? Did you not get a result? You know what I mean? I can't preach about that enough.
I love that. That's great. With kind of speaking on that, because I'm interested in it as well, with like testing and retesting and kind of gauging progress. You and I are pretty relatively at the same point. I haven't competed, but at the same point of like training wise for jujitsu. Like I know we can kind of sit back and subjectively and arbitrarily say like we have gotten better at that point in time.
Yeah.
But it's like the same for people that don't know like any martial arts. Like getting belts is just complete, like belting up is completely different for school to school, from different like locations. People have different philosophies about it. So other than that, it's hard to kind of gauge progress like aggressively, like this is exactly what happened, this is exactly where you're at this stage, because there's no kind of, most places don't do a test out.
Yeah.
Have you been able to like quantify like maybe success in jujitsu at all, or do you think it's like competitive? Like there's no real right answer to this. I'm just wondering if you thought about it at all.
I think it's probably the same for you with the jujitsu. I mean, I've been in a weight room for like 12 years now, and I've been on a mat for like 3 months. So I know like what would probably be best for me is to go on the jujitsu mat twice a day versus lift one in the morning and go to jujitsu at night. Just because like I know, what do I know? I know my stand-up game is awful because I didn't wrestle growing up. And when we practice drilling and practice every day, we're on the mats like doing something, and you only do stand-up if you go to no-gi. So like it's hard for me to quantify from a weight room perspective because it's such a far gap between the two. I guess things I was looking at was just, and I don't have any specific numbers, but like more so just looking at like isolated, like pulling strength, like lat strength, I stopped squatting on 2 legs just because I was like, I probably squat enough to get jiu-jitsu. I might as well start doing like lunging and things like that. But yeah, I don't know. It's just such a far gap between the two. I haven't really figured it out yet. We'll see though. We'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think about all the training that goes into like all the MMA guys and all the UFC fighters and stuff, and you have to put in all these different qualities and elements from so many different backgrounds, whether it be like stand-up boxing and karate or taekwondo, and then all the grappling, wrestling, and like the ground game stuff from jiu-jitsu and everything. You always wonder like how does strength training fall in line with all that stuff? And it's interesting. I mean, we're only doing one of those pieces. We're not doing MMA, but to kind of see within our own training how like weight room stuff benefits jiu-jitsu or kind of impacts it negatively. it's something that I'm still toying around with. So it's cool to hear like your opinion on it.
Yeah, and I think when I felt my best was when I kept every set at 7 seconds, no longer. So like it was like a really high output for those 7 seconds. So it was like a 7-second hold or like 7 second as many reps as I could. Because that's, I mean, like when you're doing the jiu-jitsu, it's kind of like you're just holding a position and you're just maintaining until you see an opening. Boom, you take it. And then you're holding another position until you see another opening. So, and that kind of like goes back to like alactic capacity, or even like your high quality alactic work, and then you do capacity after. That was the best I found. Also, I was doing a lot of sprinting and plyos 2 days a week. And even though my stand-up game is still awful, I felt a lot better on my feet, a lot more reactive when I was doing those kind of things. But yeah, still trying to figure it out. Still new to it.
That's cool. Yeah, we'll have to link up a little bit more too and talk about that stuff, because that's definitely what I was doing. And then now with things opening up, like how can I put strongman and throwing back into it? So it's going to be, it might be too many things to actually do, but we'll see what ends up happening. So hey, it's worth a shot.
Yeah.
There's probably someone out there doing the exact same thing as me. So hopefully if you're out there, come hit me up, because I need to find someone that's trying to train, who's lifting, who likes to compete in strongman and highland games, and then tell me what you're doing so I can try it too. Hey, so we end the show like any good training session. We got a finisher today. So we got 4 quarters, and we'll do a little bit of extra rolling at the end. So we'll have an overtime question, but take as much time as you need, or you can fire these off rapid fire. But you ready?
Yeah.
All right. First one I got for you: biggest influence in strength and conditioning, and biggest influence in strength sports.
Yeah, biggest influence. Yeah, it's got to be Cal from when I was here 3 years ago. How much I learned that summer, and just that year, it's like you always like try new things, figure out a better way to do it. Just constantly experimenting, whether you're doing it on yourself or with the athletes. Yeah, it opened up my mindset too, from like being strictly Olympic weightlifting prior. And like, oh, there's so many ways to do this. There's so many ways to train an athlete. Every way works as long as you have a reason to back it up and you apply it correctly to your athletes. Strength sport, I think Louis Simmons, just because the more I think about it every day, the more I realize that what everyone's doing is what Louis Simmons was doing whenever he started like 30 years ago. Everything that everyone's doing today is just a varied version of what he said 30 years ago. And it's just like, and they can just constantly repeat itself over and over. I always say it too, because I'm like, yeah, Louis Simmons was right about this 30 years ago. Now we're just applying it a little bit differently to athletic population. Yeah. So those would be those two.
Nice. Hey, what can you be found doing when you're not coaching or competing? What are some of your hobbies back in Minnesota now?
Mountain biking is a big one out here now. There's a lot, like you wouldn't think it, but within like a half an hour Minneapolis, there's 4 really good trails. So I've gotten into that. That's kind of like the weekend activity now.
Right on. Hey, if you weren't coaching in strength conditioning, what do you think you would be doing? And if I took away CrossFit and Jiu Jitsu, what would be your next sport to try?
I would probably be doing something like forestry or something where I'd be out in the woods. I don't know, something where I'd be out in the woods every day, like guiding backpacking trips, something like that. Or like, I always thought like maybe like taking like troubled youth out in the woods for backpacking trips and giving them that experience would be something cool. So something along those lines around the woods. What was that second one?
If I took away Jiu Jitsu and CrossFit, what would be your new sport to try?
New sport. Like 10 years ago, it would have been like competitive wakeboarding or something like that. But like now, I'd probably jump into another martial art. I have a buddy who does Muay Thai, says it's a blast. So something like that where there's a competitive aspect to it. Yeah.
All right. Hey, so if you're setting up an ideal training day for yourself, what is your go-to PR song or radio station, and what's your go-to post-training meal look like?
So the song, got this from Chris Bolzman, but that Last of the Mohicans theme song, especially if it's like a snatch or a clean and jerk, definitely throwing that one on. Go-to post-training meal, Cracker Barrel. I would get a pancake breakfast and then normal breakfast, and then enjoy those unlimited biscuits as well.
Okay. Those are both two good ones. Hey, so last one I got for you. What is the most valuable piece of advice you've received? And if you want to share, from who?
Most valuable. Oh, I guess, I don't know if this is the most valuable. First one that comes to mind. Derek O'Connell, who used to work at Minnesota, he just took a new job recently. When I was at Minnesota that first time, he's like, so what are you doing besides strength and conditioning, like, to make money? I was like, nothing really. He goes, you better figure that out, because you're probably gonna get fired from a job and not have an income. There's a good chance that's gonna happen. So then I started the whole MASQ training thing, and the whole online programming thing kind of just blew up. And that, I mean, like, yeah, it's a great second source of income, but also just all the learning and all the people I've met through that has been huge. So that was really good advice.
Yeah, that's for sure great advice. And that kind of leads into this next too, which is perfect. I mean, we kind of know the profession, and I think it feeds into each other too. Like, you being able to program for a bunch of different people, it helps who you're working with at Minnesota, and it makes you better. And if it makes a little bit of extra income on the side too, it definitely helps. So how can people actually get in touch with you, kind of follow you, like follow MASQ Training, and like if they've got any inquiries for online training and they want to work with you, where can they get a hold of you, man?
Yeah, so the easiest way would be through my Instagram. It's at Quaal or at MASQ Training, MASQ.training. Then I also got a website where I'm always putting up every idea I have. I have a blog where I just write things down sporadically as I think about them, or as we like look into them and research in Minnesota or wherever else I've been. But yeah, so either of those, really. I mean, I'm not as great. I go off and on the whole posting thing, but I always get back to people quick when they message me.
Awesome. Yeah, sometimes you're in the woods a little bit, or you got a lot of stuff going on. So
yeah,
you'll get it eventually and be able to track it down. We'll link everything up though, so people can get a hold of you. And I mean, it's great to have you on. Obviously, another Iron Hoya, and someone that we've shared some conversations with, and I love picking your brain about Jiu Jitsu, since we're in the same status right now. And it's been good to have you on the show, man. So I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing everything with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nick. It was fun. And it's tough being at the bottom of the totem pole as a white belt.
Hey, I'm okay. I'm going to have that same mentality for a long time, but it'd be nice once in a while to not be on the receiving end of a choke for just once.
Yeah, that first time when you actually choke somebody, you're like, oh, finally.
Oh, that was the best day.
Yeah.
That was the best day.
Yeah.
Nice, man. Well, that was great advice, and you took the bull by the horns. You got everything set up for your online training and everything. So like I said, I'll link it all up, and I appreciate you coming on today. I know you're really busy right now in the summer getting ready for hockey season. So thanks again for coming on today, man.
Hey, yep. Thanks again for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, bud.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors, Cerberus Strength. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.